number one, the FDA has been so wrong and still has not updated. If you look at the triangle over time, or the 4 food groups, and what it's changed into and stuff, it's so far off from what reality is today, what people are eating. Why have they been so wrong for so long? Something. You didn't have the science there yet. The science eventually caught up to where you were. There was some science out there, but you knew something. I guess, what was it? When you were eating stuff, felt better? How did you have...
I'm sorry. Everything about the recommendations is very bought and paid for.
It's paid for.
It's very much influenced. I came to this kind of food through, this is so hippie, crunchy, lovey-dovey, but I came to it through, I was totally infatuated with this food, I just loved it. So I came through the door of, this is so good, I love it. It wasn't a should, it wasn't my own finger wagging, you should be doing this. It's almost like you love what is mysterious and other sometimes. And growing up in a meat and potatoes household, as many of you did, I happened to be infatuated with the green beans on my, that were way, like this little tiny, because we were a family of 6, and we had 1 pack of 8-ounce frozen French cut green beans on the diagonal to feed 6 people. And my first vegetable recipe that I learned how to make when I was 8 was I thought my food literacy was not very high. I thought the green beans grew in the freezer. They somehow came out of the freezer. That's right. But the recipe was you unpack it, you unwrap it, put it in the pot, you put a little water, you apply some heat, and when the corners fall down and it's no longer square, serve. And I even loved that. So I came through love. I discovered vegetable gardens as a middle schooler. My mother took me to a French restaurant when I was 14 in Toronto, which was our big city because I was from Rochester, and mushroom soup made from mushrooms. I had had my first cauliflower. Fresh vegetables were so exotic in those days, and so I just fell in love. So I started. The other piece is it was very. It was a big fad among my friends to study international folk music and folk dancing from the Balkans and Bulgaria and what used to be Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia and Hungary and Israel and places like that. And we would have, we'd play the music, we'd sing the songs, we'd do the dances from those countries. That was when we got wild, But we would do research on the authentic culture, and that included the food, and it included things as of that time, absolutely unheard of in this culture. As of that time, things made from bulgur like tabbouleh, things made from eggplant like moussaka, hummus, tahini sauces, salads that were a bunch of very, very ripe tomatoes with feta cheese and red onions from Bulgaria, and just so plant food and things with fresh mint and olive oil, and I started learning how to cook these things. I was also very influenced by the food writer Paula Wolford, who was the first American cookbook author to bring these ideas to this country, and she would travel in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I was infatuated with this food. And then it's such a bonus, isn't it, to have what you're infatuated with turn out to be good for you? But the love came first. And I wasn't really on the right track with the nutrition because I fell victim to the notion, to the myth that was prevalent beginning in the 80s of low fat being a good thing for you. Right, very shortly after the Moosewood Cookbook was published in the early 1980s, the low fat trend started coming in. Parallel, it turns out, to that was the obesity epidemic. They had the same curve. Because people would say, I can't have fat, and what would they replace it with? Sugar. I would make a beautiful chocolate chip cookie with butter and offer it to one of my low-fat subscribing friends, and they'd say, oh, I cannot eat your cookie. And then they'd go to the store and buy an entire box of Nabisco snack wells because they had no fat, and they'd eat the whole box. But they wouldn't even eat one cookie. You can tell how I feel about that. But what happened also was when low fat was the idea, and it was a notion, and my definition of a notion is an idea that is completely has no factual basis. It's just you decide that's true. It's so hard to make vegetables taste good when they're plain. And then in comes this other kind of notion of the morality of certain foods, that if we eat a piece of broccoli that is barely cooked and like cut into large chunks and goes on forever, and no seasoning, but it's lightly steamed, this is somehow going to make everything okay with, you know, the judgment day, that somehow we are, well, it's like our life won't be longer, but it will seem interminable. But I will be a good person. And we took out, go to cocktail parties in the 80s, and there's like these big spears of raw broccoli and raw zucchini, and everyone's pretending they like it. So this was the low-fat craze, and I was, and meanwhile, I had made this cookbook with all these casseroles filled with eggs and cheese, because I was trying to convince people who loved meat that it would be enough to make them full. And then the low-fat thing happens. And the saddest moment of my cookbook writing life was in the mid-'80s when I'm trying to come up with a recipe for low-fat latkes. I was being called a hotline. It was like, oh, this is so I was not on the nutritional, I did not know from that I was subscribing to the same assumptions that the general population was. And my joke in 1992, when I revised the Moosewood Cookbook in 1992, I retested. I thought, well, I haven't made these recipes in a long time. In the interim, I'd written a few other cookbooks. I thought, I'm going to go back and cook every single recipe from Moosewood. And I'm going to do this thing where I look at the book. I knew a lot of them by heart then. I'd look at the book and just make note, close it, and cook it how I cooked then. My now, that was then. And a lot of them came out very similar, and a lot of them came out very reduced in fat, not fat-free, but fewer eggs, less olive. That olive oil was starting to come in, but mostly my early recipes were buttered. So I reduced, and my big joke, in 1992 was, well, if anyone ever decides that fat is good for you, as if they would, I'll do it all over again, and then that happened. Because my big event was in 1998. I got a letter from Walter Willett from Harvard, the chair of the nutrition department at the Harvard School of Public Health, who asked me to start working with him to show on the plate what his research looked like in the charts and graphs. And lo and behold, his big crusade, which turned out to be so successful, thank God, was to convince the American public that fat is not an enemy, that certain fats are essential, that the word essential and essential fatty acids is literal, and that we need to go out of our way to put olive oil, avocado, and nuts back into our diets and stop demonizing fat. And this was the best thing that happened to me since the low-fat latkes. Hallelujah, olive oil, nuts, superfood, avocado, fat, and suddenly those broccoli spears got cooked a little more. They got dressed in olive oil, and it gets even better because I now know from Dr. Willett, who's informed me, educated me, the presence of a good oil with a green vegetable not only makes it taste better, and not only is it okay, it actually renders the nutrients in the broccoli, the beta-carotenes, more bioavailable. So you get more out of the vegetable if they're dressed in oil. And then you want seconds. And then you eat more of the vegetable. So if you were to ask me, maybe you will, if I could just choose 2 words to describe how the heart of the plate differs from the Moosewood Cookbook, I would say olive oil. It's so important to me. It's almost like I have to have it near me in order to be, I can't cook without it. And the recipes in the heart of the plate are at the opposite end of the spectrum. Not that I don't still use the Moosewood recipes, but in the Moosewood ones I would dump a bunch of it. It was like, the more ingredients, the better, plus sunflower seeds. Plus sunflower seeds. Casserole, put them all together, mix them up. Combination. In the heart of the plate, it's the separate, smaller components, collaboration.